There are whispers low and venomous among the archivists of Terra's forbidden vaults. They speak not of demons, nor Xenos, nor even the maddened Primarchs who once broke empires with their will. They speak instead of a shadow that does not belong to this universe, a being whose essence defies both warp and matter. The records call it Spawn, though the name shifts in the tongues of 1,000 dead worlds. It came not from the Immaterium, nor from the void between galaxies, but from something older, deeper, an order of damnation that existed before the warp itself learned to scream. The first sighting was never meant to be a record. A fragment of a lost astropathic distress call, intercepted by the black ships, translated and burned from the archives. The voice trembled with madness. Asterisk, it wears darkness as a crown. Its chains are alive. Asterisk, the transmission ended with sounds not unlike the weeping of engines dying in the void. To most within the administratum, it was dismissed as another warp-induced hallucination. But the Inquisition, those who see too much and speak too little, filed it under non-Euclidean incursions. That was the first sign of the coming storm. Visual cue: a void-lit cathedral, the stars bending like molten glass beyond stained windows. In the far reaches of Segmentum Obscurus, a planet named Nerith IV burned for 9 days. Witnesses swore that no ship entered orbit, no bombardment struck from the heavens. Yet entire hives collapsed as though pulled into themselves, the air thick with the scent of brimstone and blood. Servitors reported silhouettes walking through fire, one of them wrapped in black flesh that moved like living smoke. When the Imperial Guard arrived, they found nothing left alive, only a single mark carved into stone, a sigil of interlocking chains around a spiral of flame. The Inquisition declared it heresy and purged the records. But still, the whispers continued. They say he came through a wound in reality, not torn by warp travel, but by something more deliberate, an act of will. Where demons claw through, this being stepped. And when his foot touched the ash, the air itself recoiled. It was not a demon's presence, not a god's, but something personal, like vengeance given form. His eyes burned green beneath the shadow of a crimson helm, and his voice carried the weight of judgment. Some called him a herald of the ruinous powers. Others believed him an ancient weapon, awakened by the Imperium's collective sins. But none could deny the power that followed him, the ability to rend both spirit and flesh, to twist matter as though reality itself feared him. Visual cue: Spawn standing before a shattered shrine world, his cloak a storm of shadow and fire. For all the Imperium's vast knowledge, 10,000 years of blood, conquest, and scripture, no one could classify him. The Adeptus Mechanicus sent their most zealous magi to capture and dissect the phenomenon. None returned. Their data fragments described his biomass as a self-assembling necroorganic network, capable of altering its density, regenerating faster than any known entity, even faster than the fabled Primarchs. The Mechanicus screamed heresy before their own screams were cut short, replaced by silence and the hiss of melting steel. Some whispered that the Emperor himself felt the disturbance. In the hallowed quiet of the Golden Throne, a tremor passed through the Astronomicon, dimming its holy light for 7 seconds. 7 seconds of terror across the Imperium. Astropaths bled from their eyes. Navigators saw a figure walking through the void between stars. A presence that ignored the warp's laws entirely. The silence afterward was almost reverent, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Visual cue: the Astronomicon flickering, Terra's skyline drowning in red light. On the 8th night after Nerith IV's fall, a fragment of Spawn's energy signature reached the Black Library. The Harlequins who guard its gates spoke of a soul too fractured for even chaos to claim. The laughing god himself, it is said, gazed upon this intruder's essence and found no mirth there, only wrath, forged and honed until it became identity. For Spawn was not born, nor created by a god, he was made by sin, the kind that cannot be absolved by death or faith. A mortal man once, consumed by betrayal, bound to infernal pacts, cursed to walk eternity as both weapon and prisoner. The warp understood him only as an intruder, something that existed outside its jurisdiction. It was inevitable that his presence would draw attention. The demons felt him first. Khorne's legions, ever eager for a challenge, descended upon his shadow as it crossed the dead moon of Sorinth. The battle was brief, brutal, and absolute. Witness accounts, scattered, corrupted, speak of rivers of brass turned to black glass, of blood letters impaled by chains that moved like serpents. And when the moon itself began to collapse, Spawn walked from the fire unburned, his cape torn, his armor dripping with molten ichor. He said nothing. The demons screamed his name into the warp, and the echoes reached the ears of the Chaos Gods, and now they knew he existed. Visual cue: shattered moon breaking apart, chains slicing through demons amid a storm of warp fire. From that moment, the balance shifted. The dark gods are jealous beings, and something that walks in their realm without their consent is a threat beyond comprehension. Sench whispered that Spawn was a paradox, a mortal soul wrapped in divine punishment. Nurgle laughed, calling him a corpse that refuses to rot. Slaanesh shivered in fascination, sensing an agony purer than any pleasure. Khorne raged, swearing to tear him limb from limb. Yet none could truly grasp him. For Spawn's power did not come from worship, nor from devotion, it came from loss, an endless hunger to correct an injustice that could never be undone. The Inquisition debated exterminatus on every world where he was sighted. But he moved like a ghost through time and ruin, striking where corruption festered deepest, an imperial cardinal with a demon heart, a chaos sorcerer masquerading as a saint, a Xenos warlord hiding in human skin. Wherever he went, the balance of power twisted. He was no savior, yet neither was he conqueror. He was something worse, an arbiter of guilt. Some said he sought the emperor himself, to question the divine about the nature of damnation. Others claimed he searched for a way home, clawing through dimensions to find the earth he once knew. But each step took him deeper into madness, his necroplasm feeding on the psychic rot of the 41st millennium. The warp whispered his past back to him in the voices of the damned, and he answered them with fire. Visual cue: Spawn walking through a battlefield of corpses, banners of Imperial and Chaos alike burning under a red sky. By the time the Imperium realized this was no simple incursion, it was already too late. He had entered the warp's periphery not as a victim, but as a sovereign of his own damnation. And wherever he went, reality followed, torn and reforged in his wake. For the first time in 1,000 years, both the Imperium and Chaos stood uncertain, not of victory or defeat, but of comprehension. They looked upon this intruder, and for a brief, horrifying moment, in the wake of Spawn's
they realized
arrival,
the truth,
the galaxy's
greater
secret
than
orders
gods
had learned to
with
hate.
fear
Disguised as curiosity. The Inquisition gathered in veiled conclaves, their sigils dim under sanctified firelight. Records that should have been burned were instead copied, encrypted, and hidden within forbidden archives beneath Terra's crust. There was something in this creature's existence that gnawed at the Imperium's very theology. A mortal soul wielding divine punishment, unaffiliated with Chaos or the Emperor, undermined the entire foundation upon which 10,000 years of faith had been built. If a man could return from death bearing the power of the damned without falling to the warp, what then was the Emperor's divine monopoly on resurrection? Visual cue: a candlelit chamber deep beneath Terra, Inquisitors cloaked in shadow, servoskulls recording every tremor in their voices. Within the Ordo Malleus, theories multiplied like contagion. Some claimed Spawn was a weapon from the dark age of technology, an autonomous construct designed to contain psychic corruption. Others whispered that he was a fragment of the Emperor's own soul, lost during his ascension and returned with wrath. But the oldest and most dangerous speculation came from Inquisitor Dale Varin, a scholar of forbidden metaphysics. He proposed that Spawn was proof of a third power, a realm neither materium nor immaterium, a dimension born of pure consequence. A place where sin itself is currency and will alone dictates survival. A plane that births monsters not from faith, but from the moral weight of human failure. The Inquisition silenced him before his words could spread, yet the theory persisted, growing like rot in the minds of those who had seen Spawn's devastation firsthand. Meanwhile, the creature moved across the stars with uncanny intent. His journey was neither random nor aimless. Each world he touched bore a secret, a corruption buried under centuries of obedience. On Ilex Prime, he emerged within the catacombs of an ecclesiarchy basilica, its priests long since replaced by chaos cultists wearing saintly robes. They greeted him as a herald of their patron, expecting salvation through slaughter. What followed was no battle, it was an erasure. Chains erupted from the floor like living steel, tearing the false priests apart, their blood evaporating into smoke before it touched the sacred stones. Spawn spoke no words. He left behind only silence and the faint scent of sulfur. When the Sisters of Battle arrived days later, they found their chapel whole again, its statues weeping black tears. They called it a miracle. The Inquisition called it evidence. Visual cue: the interior of a cathedral bathed in dim red light, statues of saints watching his chains carve through cultists. His actions defied moral categories. He destroyed chaos, yet slaughtered Imperials with equal ease when corruption was found among them. No loyalty anchored him. The servants of the throne saw him as a blasphemy too precise to dismiss, a reminder that righteousness without purity is merely theater. Even among the heretics of the warp, his existence disturbed the balance. Demons spoke of him as a voided soul, something that could neither be possessed nor bargained with. They attacked him out of reflex, only to dissolve in his presence as if purity and damnation coexisted within the same vessel. In the 41st millennium, where every being serves a master, a god, or an ideal, Spawn alone stood as something else entirely, a creature governed only by the debt of his own suffering. In time, his path brought him to Cadia's ruins. The planet was long shattered, its fragments still caught in the eye of terror's turbulent maw. Yet even there, amid drifting shards of rock and frozen corpses, something called to him. The remnants of a Black Legion fortress, half devoured by the warp, still clung to existence. Inside, he found murals painted in blood, depictions of humanity's fall, of angels chained to thrones of bone, of a man with green eyes wearing a crimson helm, drawn centuries before his arrival. The chaos sorcerers who had crafted these heretical visions were long dead, their essence burned away. But their prophecy remained, the spawned one shall come when the gods sleep, to break the spine of destiny itself. Whether prophecy or coincidence, the message was clear. His arrival had been foreseen, and not even by human minds. Visual cue: debris fields orbiting a half-ruined fortress drifting near the Eye of Terror, faint green light flickering from within. As Spawn stood among the remnants, his memories whispered. Earth, his home, felt like a dream now, its skyscrapers and gunfire distant echoes drowned by centuries of alien skies. Yet fragments of humanity clung to him, love lost, betrayal endured, vengeance unfulfilled. Those emotions were the crucible of his being, the fuel that made his power infinite yet unstable. The necroplasm that composed his body responded to memory as much as will. When rage surged, it burned like a dying star. When guilt resurfaced, it twisted his flesh into shapes too monstrous to behold. The warp around him trembled not because he drew upon it, but because his pain resonated with its frequency. He was both an intruder and an amplifier, an emotional weapon that mirrored the Immaterium's chaos back at itself. Word of his movement reached the Black Templars. To them, anything that defied the Emperor's order was an affront to existence. A crusade was declared, small at first, a single strike force under Marshal Laverne Cassiel. They found him on a world cloaked in eternal dusk, its sky thick with ash and lightning. When the Templars confronted him, they expected defiance, perhaps mockery. Instead, he stood silent as their bolters roared. His body absorbed the fire like clay struck by rain. Then the chains came, silent, fluid, unerring. In moments, a dozen Astartes lay broken, their ceramite armor torn open like paper. Cassiel, wounded but unbroken, raised his sword and shouted the Emperor's name. Spawn regarded him for a long moment, then spoke, his voice low and resonant. He too was a man once. Tell me what your god has done for you, but demand obedience. Cassiel's strike fell short as his weapon melted in his grasp. Spawn turned away. He did not kill the marshal. Mercy, it seemed, was another kind of cruelty. Visual cue: lightning over a barren world, chains wrapping around space marines, one knight kneeling in defiance. Afterward, reports from the Templars became fragmented. Cassiel refused to speak of the encounter, claiming that to remember it was to question his faith. The chapter reclassified Spawn as a Class Sigma heretic entity, forbidden from discussion except within inquisitorial oversight. Yet rumors spread faster than edicts. In the lower decks of void ships and the trenches of hive worlds, soldiers whispered of a dark angel who punished the corrupt and spared the innocent, who burned demons with their own rage. Pilgrims began carving his likeness into shrine walls, mistaking him for a lost saint. The ecclesiarchy denounced it as heresy, yet could not stop the spread. For the Imperium, this was the true danger, not his violence, but his meaning. In a universe that worships gods of war and decay, Spawn's existence suggested something intolerable, that a mortal soul could transcend divine authority. To the faithful, it was blasphemy. To the damned, it was hope. And to the Inquisition, it was an anomaly that could unravel the spiritual infrastructure of the Imperium itself. He was not the herald of a new god, but the evidence that perhaps none of them were gods at all. Spawn's warpath continued into the Halo Stars, where ancient ruins older than humanity whispered to him in languages he had never known yet somehow understood. There, in silence and starlight, he found the first hint of something familiar, a tear in reality, faint, unstable, leading to a dimension not unlike the one he came from. But the warp surrounded it like a predator guarding its prey. He stood before it, feeling the pull of home mingled with the stench of damnation. The portal pulsed once, like a dying heart, then closed. Whether it rejected him or feared him, he could not tell. And as the stars dimmed around him, Spawn realized the truth that bound him to this cruel galaxy. He could leave, perhaps, but the universe would not let him. In the years that followed, the myth of Spawn transcended rumor and entered the forbidden annals of Imperial study. His name was erased from the official record, yet inked again in the margins by those who refused to forget. Each new sighting carried the same paradox: wherever he appeared, corruption withered, yet the fabric of reality itself trembled. To scholars of the Ordo Chronos, this hinted at something heretical, that his mere existence created temporal dissonance, threads of history folding backward around him, rewriting events without the warp's consent. It was as though reality itself could not decide when he belonged, only that he did. Visual cue: flickering chronomantic charts within a Mechanicus vault, time-lapse images of stars reversing their orbits. Spawn's nature defied categorization because he embodied contradiction. His flesh was both decayed and indestructible, his will both mortal and infinite. The Mechanicus sought to quantify him, dispatching a covert Legio Cybernetica detachment under the command of Mugos Dominus Elthervane. They tracked his energy trail to the ruins of Medrath 9, a dead forge world abandoned after a warp quake centuries prior. There, amid cathedrals of rust and bone, they found him standing before a colossal machine, one that predated the Imperium itself. It was a war engine of alien design, powered by an energy identical to his own necroplasm. When confronted, Spawn turned toward them with eyes that shimmered like dying stars. "This was never yours," he said, and the words made the air tremble. Vane, ever pragmatic, ordered the attack. Their mechanical cohort advanced hundreds of automata, their weapons glowing with plasma heat. Spawn raised a hand. The battlefield vanished into a storm of shadow and light. When the smoke cleared, the machines lay fused into the ground, their circuits turned to glass. Only Vane survived long enough to send a fragmented transmission. Asterisk: he knows the pattern. The engine answers to him. Asterisk: the Inquisition never found the site again. The coordinates were gone, erased from cogitator memory as though they had never existed. Visual cue: molten metallic planes, silhouettes of mechanical giants half absorbed into the earth, a lone figure cloaked in fire and smoke. This incident birthed a new theory, one that terrified even the most jaded scholars. Perhaps Spawn was not merely an interloper, but a nexus, a convergence point where universes met and bled into one another. His necroplasmic energy could reshape reality because it belonged to another reality entirely. In that sense, he was not an invader but a bridge. A wound through which ideas, laws, and possibilities leaked. To those who served the dark gods, this was blasphemy of the highest order. The warp is possessive, it tolerates no equal. Yet here was a being that mirrored its power, unbound by its will. Across the Eye of Terror, the Chaos Pantheon stirred. The gods of ruin rarely act in unity, yet something in Spawn's defiance drew their collective attention. Khorne sent champions to claim his skull, Slaanesh wove illusions of lost love to ensnare him, Nurgle offered peace through decay, and Tsench sought to bargain, promising passage home. Each attempt failed. Khorne's berserkers fell to chains that drank their essence. Slaanesh's mirage took the form of a woman Spawn had once loved, her voice soft, her gaze pleading. For a moment, he faltered, then the illusion cracked beneath his fury, and the warp screamed. The emotions he had buried, love, grief, guilt, ignited within him, feeding the necroplasm until the realm itself recoiled. He was not immune to temptation, but rather too human to be conquered by it. Visual cue: a kaleidoscopic warp vista fracturing under a crimson storm, spectral chains coiling around the images of fallen gods. The demons learned then what the Inquisition had begun to suspect: Spawn was powered not by sin or faith, but by refusal. He refused damnation, refused salvation, refused the tyranny of both heaven and hell. In a cosmos built upon obedience, to gods, to fate, to chaos, his defiance became a weapon sharper than any blade. Where he walked, the warp grew unstable. Demons unmade themselves in his proximity, their essence unraveling as if denied permission to exist. Even the ruinous powers began to argue over him, each claiming partial authorship, each failing to comprehend him. Meanwhile, the Imperium's political core rotted in quiet panic. The ecclesiarchy declared new purges to reinforce doctrine. Preachers thundered that Spawn was a herald of the end times, proof that the Emperor's divine order was under siege. The High Lords of Terra convened in secrecy, debating whether to unleash the Grey Knights or the Custodes themselves. Yet the Custodes refused. They claimed the Emperor had given no command. Some among them whispered that the Golden Throne itself hummed differently since the being's arrival, as if the Emperor and the intruder shared some silent recognition across eternity. Spawn continued his silent crusade. On the demon world of Carthagor, he found an ancient vault inscribed with sigils that even the warp feared to touch. Inside, he discovered relics shaped from his own energy chains forged from necroplasmic essence identical to his. Each one pulsed faintly, as though calling to him. In their presence, memories surged, the faces of those who betrayed him, the voice of the demon that cursed him, the screams of innocence he could not save. He realized then that this universe had its own versions of the same evil, the same pacts, the same false gods wearing different names. The warp was merely another disguise for the same cycle. His purpose, once revenge, had become something colder, the eradication of corruption itself, in whatever form it took. Visual cue, a cavernous vault lit by green flame, spectral chains floating in slow orbits around a lone figure. But even vengeance consumes itself. The necroplasm within him grew unstable, feeding on the psychic rot of the galaxy. With every act of destruction, his power swelled beyond control. The warp screamed in resonance, tearing at the seams between worlds. He began to sense echoes of himself scattered through time, alternate versions born from the paradox he embodied. Some were monstrous, others angelic. Each reflected a possible destiny. If left unchecked, he could fracture reality entirely, birthing infinite iterations of the same damned soul. The Eldar were the first to perceive the full danger. Through the scrying mirrors of the Black Library, they saw visions of entire sectors collapsing under paradoxical gravity, of time loops devouring themselves. The Harlequin Shadowseer known as the Silent Mask confronted Spawn within the ruins of an ancient webway nexus. She spoke to him not as foe, but as equal. "You are not meant to be here," she said. "Your existence bends the skein of fate until it snaps." Spawn listened, his gaze unflinching. "Then I will unmake fate," he replied. The Shadowseer's laughter echoed like a funeral bell. "That is what they all say before they become gods." Visual cue, dim webway tunnels swirling with golden motes, two silhouettes facing amid collapsing light. From that moment, the webway itself began to falter. Gateways flickered, connections failed. The Eldari panicked, believing he had cursed their paths. Yet Spawn moved on, untouched by fear or consequence. To him, the galaxy's suffering was both familiar and meaningless, an echo of the hell he had already endured. What haunted him now was the growing realization that his power no longer obeyed his will entirely. The necroplasm whispered, its hunger deepening, yearning to consume everything. He fought to control it, but each act of restraint only made it stronger. He had become both warden and prisoner of his own damnation, his chains now symbols of containment rather than control. Of the Inquisition, Chaos, and the Xenos races alike all came to the same grim conclusion: if Spawn continued unchecked, he would not merely reshape the galaxy, he would overwrite it. A new reality, written in his suffering, would replace the old. And in that moment of dawning horror, across countless worlds and uncountable hearts, one realization spread like contagion: he was no longer a visitor. He was becoming inevitable. The galaxy had begun to fracture under its own fear. What started as scattered anomalies, temporal distortions, warp disruptions, vanishing systems, had become an epidemic. Entire sectors reported stars dimming without reason, the void between them thickening like clotting blood. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica described it as psychic suffocation, a pressure within the warp that silenced astropaths mid-breath. Every pulse of energy, every faint echo of interference, traced back to the same presence. Wherever Spawn went, the universe folded inward, as though trying to hide from him. It was no longer a matter of invasion. It was contamination. Visual cue, a star map slowly collapsing in on itself, constellations flickering out one by one. In the vaults beneath Holy Terra, the High Lords gathered once more, their council chamber trembling with tension. The most learned among them, Saint Biologus Erath Kel, declared that the intruder was not destroying the warp, but rewriting it. He brings coherence, the man said, his voice trembling. The immaterium thrives on chaos, but where he walks, its madness organizes. The warp cannot abide structure. It is dying. That revelation sent a chill through even the most hardened inquisitors. The Emperor's light, for all its sanctity, had always been a lighthouse within storm, never the end of it. Yet this being, this lost soul, was undoing the storm itself. The ecclesiarchy demanded his destruction. The Ordo Malleus argued for containment. The Grey Knights, silent and solemn, prepared for war but hesitated to strike. Reports from Titan suggested that even the demon hunters felt unease, because in their dreams, some claimed to have seen him kneel before the golden throne. None could say whether it was prophecy or plague of the mind. The Emperor, ever silent, offered no sign. Only the Astronomicon continued to flicker, as though echoing his unseen struggle afar from the Imperium's heart. Spawn stood upon the corpse of a dying world. The sky above was torn open by the light of 1,000 dying suns, the air thick with ash and whispers. His body, once a fortress of discipline, now trembled with instability. Necroplasm leaked from his form like molten tar, consuming everything it touched. He could feel it now, the warp's resistance, its hatred. It clawed at him, desperate to unmake what it could not dominate. The chains around him writhed, eager for release, yet he held them still. For all his power, the man beneath the mask remained the soldier, the betrayed, the sinner who refused forgiveness. Visual cue, a world's surface cracking apart beneath a crimson sky, Spawn kneeling amid fire and shadows, his chains digging into the ground like roots. In the depths of the warp, the ruinous powers convened, their voices resonating like collapsing stars. They spoke of him with contempt and fascination. Khorne wished to end him by force, yet every strike of rage only made him stronger. Sench plotted to manipulate him, yet each vision of the future ended in the same ruin, his schemes devoured by a will that rejected destiny. Slaanesh whispered promises of peace, of freedom from torment, yet found no entry through his grief. Even Nurgle, who loved all rot and ruin, turned away from him, muttering that there was no cycle in this creature, only a wound that refused to heal. The gods, eternal and unyielding, reached consensus for the first time since creation. They could not destroy him. He was the embodiment of what they feared most, a mortal who denied the necessity of gods. The warp itself began to shift. Where once its storms raged uncontrollably, now came silence. Planets near the Eye of Terror reported the unimaginable: stable skies, uncorrupted air, demons fading like smoke in sunlight. For the Imperium, this should have been victory. Instead, it was terror. The warp's chaos was the price of existence, its madness the heartbeat of reality. Without it, the psychic lattice that sustained human souls began to wither. Astropaths died quietly in their sleep. Navigators lost their sight. The galaxy was stabilizing, yes, but into deathly stillness. Visual cue, the Eye of Terror shrinking, its once burning storms turning pale and thin, like frost overtaking a wound. Spawn felt the cost in his own essence. Each step toward order consumed him further. His necroplasm thickened, his body burning with agony as it tried to contain something infinite. He remembered hell not as a place, but as an idea. Suffering without end, punishment without purpose. The Imperium, the warp, even this vast galaxy of empires and faiths, were they not the same? He began to understand the cruel symmetry of existence, that damnation was not a realm but a loop, one that repeated through every reality. He was not sent to destroy it, he was its consequence somewhere. In the labyrinthine networks of the Black Library, the Harlequins watched his ascension with sorrowful awe. He will become what he despises, murmured the silent mask. A god born of refusal. The seers debated whether to intervene, but it was too late. The skein of fate had already been rewritten. The threads that once danced across eternity now converged upon a single burning point, the figure of a man standing at the edge of everything. Spawn reached the void between stars, where even light feared to tread. The veil between realities rippled there, whispering of home. He could feel the faint pulse of the world he had lost, the city streets of his birth, the echo of his name, the warmth of a sun that had never known war. Yet he did not step through. He understood now that return was impossible. The universe he had left behind would only become another cage, another hell to infect. His curse was permanence. His purpose, unending, visual cue, an infinite void where shards of broken galaxies drift like glass, Spawn standing at its heart, his cloak spreading like wings. Across the galaxy, those who felt his presence found themselves changed. Some were driven mad, haunted by visions of endless mirrors. Others became prophets, preaching a gospel of liberation from divine will. The Inquisition slaughtered them in droves, yet their message spread faster than blood could cleanse it. The gods can bleed. The gods can die. For the first time in millennia, the warp recoiled from humanity instead of the other way around. Fear became a two-edged blade, and mortals wielded it with trembling hands. The balance between matter and madness reached breaking point. The Emperor's light flickered once more, and for a heartbeat, the Astronomicon went dark. In that silence, some claimed to hear a voice, deep and mournful, whisper a single word, enough. When the beacon flared back to life, the warped storms had changed color, burning a deeper crimson, threaded with veins of green fire. Scholars argued over its meaning, but those who gazed too long reported the same vision, a silhouette of a man wrapped in chains, walking away into the darkness of the Inquisition erased all records, declaring it apocryphal. The ecclesiarchy renamed it the Silence of Judgment and forbade further discussion. Yet among the hidden orders of the galaxy, the truth endured. The warp had blinked, and something had looked back. Whether Spawn remained, ascended, or simply ceased was unknown. What mattered was the echo he left behind, a universe that could no longer believe in absolutes. Visual cue, distant starlight fading to black, the faint outline of chains glimmering across the void. And so the chronicles end, as all imperial records must, half burned, half whispered, written in fear. Perhaps Spawn found peace, or perhaps he became the very foundation of the next cosmos. In the cold silence of the galaxy, where faith and fire are the only constants, his legend remains a scar across time itself, because even in a universe ruled by gods and monsters, there are still things that exist beyond their grasp, and sometimes, damnation learns how to dream.